Alright, in this video we're going to take a look at performing basic operations on complex numbers. So we're going to take a look at addition, subtraction, multiplication, and exponents. In the first problem we have 3i plus 5i. So we're going to add them together just like if they were x's. So I have 3i plus 5i, 3 plus 5 gives me 8, so it's just 8i. Okay, and if we want to classify it, I know 8i is imaginary. And I also know that it is a complex number. Okay, moving on to number 2. So I have 3 plus 7i plus 9 minus 5i. Whenever you're adding complex numbers, you just add together the like terms. So you're adding the real parts together, adding the imaginary parts together. So 3 plus 9 gives me 12. 7 plus negative 5 gives me 2, or 2i. So again, if we want to classify, Um, we actually only need one line. It's just a complex number because it has a real part and an imaginary part. All right, moving on to the third problem, we now have subtraction. So it's just like whenever you subtract polynomials, we're going to take that negative in between the two complex numbers. We're going to make it a -1, and we're going to distribute the -1 into the second set of parentheses. So once I distribute, so I have 7 minus 8i minus 3 minus 2i. Then we combine like terms. So the real parts are 7 and -3, which give me 4. -8i and -2i gives me -10i. So we have a complex number. The real part is 4. The imaginary part is -10. Okay, so that's addition and subtraction. Moving on to multiplication. Multiplication of complex numbers works just like polynomials. We have to distribute. So I'm going to distribute to 4. Then I'm going to distribute the -6i. So if I distribute to 4, 4 times 2 gives me 8. 4 times 5i gives me 20i. So I distribute to 4 to both terms. Then I have to distribute that -6. -6i times 2 is -12i. -6i times 5i is -30i squared. Then we combine like terms. So I have 8. And then we have 20 minus 12i, which gives me 8i minus 30i squared. And then we have to remember back to some of our previous lessons where we know I is equal to the square root of -1. And if I is equal to the square root of -1, I squared is equal to the square root of -1 times itself, which is the square root of -1 times the square root of -1, which is -1. So we have 8 plus 8i minus 30 times I squared, which is -1. And then we multiply -30 times -1, 8 plus 8i plus 30. In our last step, we're going to finish combining like terms, which gives me 38 plus 8i. Okay, so now we're going to take another look at multiplying two binomials or two complex numbers, and we're going to make sure we pay attention to that I squared. So we're going to distribute to 7, distribute to 4i. 7 times 2 gives me 14. 7 times -3i gives me -21i. Then we have 4i times 2 is 8i. 4i times -3 is -12i squared. Okay, we combine like terms, and again, we substitute -1 in for I squared. So I have 14 minus 13i minus 12, and I squared is -1. Okay, multiply that -12 times -1, so we have 14 minus 13i plus 12. Combine like terms again, and we get 26 minus 13i. Okay, so for these two problems, we got a complex number for both answers. Okay, so in this one, 26 is the real part, -13 is the imaginary part. And moving on to the last one. It's very similar to the previous two problems. Okay, so we have a binomial squared or a complex number squared, which means we're just going to write it out 2 times and multiply it times itself. Okay, so I rated out 2 times. Distribute just like the previous two problems. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times negative 4i is negative 8i. Negative 4i times 2 is negative 8i. Negative 4i times negative 4i is 16i squared. Okay, again, I know I squared is negative 1. So we have 4 minus 16i, because negative 8i minus 8i is negative 16i, plus 16 times negative 1. So we have 4 minus 16i minus 16. Combine like terms, that gives me negative 12 minus 16i. And that is our final answer. Real parts negative 12, imaginary parts negative 16.